and welcome to this newest episode of Ecosystem Café. It's my honor and privilege to have Tanja and Markus with me today. We'll be discussing today about the ecosystem building and actually how we can invest in tomorrow's startups, tomorrow entrepreneurs, and tomorrow's future and new technologies in this session. So this startup ecosystem cafe is actually powered by Western Balkans Startup Alliance, which is umbrella organizations of the Western Balkan Startup Hubs. We've done this organization to promote entrepreneurship, startup culture, and investment into startups from the Balkan region and connect them to the rest of EU and worldwide. My name is Gogo Rafailovsky, and I will be your moderator today. I come from CU Tech Park, which is actually university-based tech park in North Macedonia, with helping startups and scale-ups reach their maximum potential through the years with tailor-made programs, acceleration programs, and investments. But I'm the not most important person today. This is Tanja and Markus. So we start first with the lady. Tanja Kuzman is the director of the PWC Southeast Europe, and she is in charge of innovation, startup, and digital domains. And my other guest is Markus Raunig. He's actually running he's the chairman of the Austrian Startups, the non-for-profit organizations and platform that promotes the entrepreneurship in Austria. So without further ado, Tanja, we'll start with you first. Please introduce yourself, what's unique about your organization, and what's your role in the ecosystem.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for ability to share today together with Markus and yourself some of the insights from the ecosystem. When it comes to let's say my career and development path, I would say that I changed my career some years ago and went from corporate financing and corporate governance into the startup world. Because I was actually joining back in the UK one VC fund, and there in the UK I was investment principal, doing and deciding about the investments in startups in the UK in one segment, of course. And I would say that was like my entrance into the startup world. Before that, as we all know, in educational systems, you don't learn much, or you haven't learned much back in the days. I better rephrase that. So in that sense, I mean, the moment I entered that world, I fell in love, and since then I'm supporting the development of the startup ecosystems in the Southeast Europe, and even wider through our global network of PWC. We are trying actually to use the best practices regarding the development of entrepreneurship, startup support organizations, individual startup support programs, in order to help and create global products that will be used by a large number of users from different countries. So in that sense, I would say that our role is dual. On one hand, helping governments improve the ecosystems, and then on the other hand, helping actually individual startups to grow their businessing, find financing, and actually become the global players.
Thank you, Tanja. I'll be shooting a lot of questions on how corporates can evolve into the startup ecosystem from your perspective. And now, Markus, the screen is yours.
Thanks also from my side. Hi, Tanja. Hi, Gogo. I'm chairing Austrian Startups. Austrian Startups is a nonprofit that aims to foster entrepreneurship, especially innovative entrepreneurship in Austria. And we do that practically on based on three different activities. First one, we are community builders. So over time, we have built big event series and communication channels, a newsletter, a podcast that I'm also co-hosting, and lots of social media activities. Secondly, we're trying to create better conditions for entrepreneurship in Austria. So we're doing that based on our work as a think tank. So we try to research the developments that we see and give recommendations to political decision makers. Where last time we published 37 recommendations and 18 of those made it into the governance program. And finally, we are also an education platform. So we are having two different education programs, one on a very broad scale where we are in more than 100 schools all over Austria and trying to promote and teach entrepreneurship already early on. And then more specified, more narrow program, the Entrepreneur Leadership Program for soon-to-be founders, preparing them for the experience of starting up.
Yeah, thank you, Markus. I know that you are very active on various fields. We'll talk about it in details later, because we, as a national ecosystem, but also in the Western Balkans, have been also involved in some policy change papers, recommendations. So probably your help will be useful for the Western Balkans too. Tanja, PWC is a large corporation working with clients from many countries and many industries, and it's been operating in our region, in the Southeast European region, for over 30 years. So you're from this region also. Tell me, what has been your experience for working in our ecosystem regionally?
Well, I think that things have changed significantly, and I can speak, more closely from the last 5 years since I came back, and actually, I'm totally immersed, in the last 5 years in all the ecosystems. And I would say that what I can see definitely from this perspective right now is that the development of ecosystems in the last 5 years was really, really significant. Because prior to that, you had some examples of certain successful startups, but they were really outliers, and you can name them on one arm would be enough probably for the whole region. However, I think that in the last 5 years, we have seen the changes in on one hand, the attitudes of the governments towards entrepreneurship and the startup ecosystem, which means that they recognize that they need to improve the business environment from different perspectives. And then on the other hand, I think that a cultural shift has happened actually. So now it's no longer strange to be an entrepreneur. It's much closer to the younger generations. They have a lot more individuals that they can get to know, their stories, how they succeeded in the global market. So I think that we now see that in the region, you still have, I would say, outliers as such, but then their number has definitely significantly increased. Having said that, I also believe that in general, we still have a long way to go, and there is a lot more that we can all do. So I'm glad, also for the fact that we have realized that regionally, individual countries on the global map might not be that significant, but as a region, we might have a better chances of being seen, heard, and recognized as ecosystem, single one on the regional level that has produced great startups in that regard, and that actually stands behind and supports these startups in the global market. So in that sense, I think that regionally we can do a lot more, meaning exchange of experiences and learning from each other. And then I believe also that, regarding the education, as Markus said, that's one of their pillars. That's also where I see that we need to work a lot more in order to be able to see a greater shift in the startup ecosystem and our ecosystems going to the next phase of development. As such, but definitely there is a positive progress. And in generally in the ecosystems, when you talk to founders, when you talk to different organizations, you see this willingness to further improve and support, all the changes that are awaiting for us.
Yes, actually, I can agree on so many levels with you. I think the region is also getting boosted, like you said, in the educational, in the startup and entrepreneurship sense. But maybe the next phase is boosting the local investors or the investment scene to bring forward and to step up into this. Yeah, so thank you. Markus, Austria has been featured as one of the top most innovative countries in some reports, between 17 and 18 place. So even leaving behind largely developed countries in Europe and the rest of the world. So how did you achieve this as a nation? What is the key ingredient, and what's your actually contribution as a business support organization or community builders to this?
Mm-hmm. I mean, first of all, I would challenge that we are so innovative. I think, yes, traditionally we have strong research because we have lots of strong universities in Austria. And also, I think on a macro level, we are forced to be innovative in some way because our economy on its own is quite small. We're a small country. So to be successful as a small country, you have to export. And to be able to survive on export markets, you have to do something better than the rest. So I think this is a natural incentive for Austrian companies to be innovative. At the same time, I think there's still a lot of room to improve, a lot of room for improvement. And I think we are leaving a lot of potential untouched. So for example, the TU München, so the technical university in Munich, is producing more spin-offs than all Austrian universities together. It's just one of the statistics where I think it could be much more. Austria could be much more innovative if culturally we would appreciate it more and if we would foster it more.
Yeah, that's a very good insight. Do you think that most of the innovation in Austria come from university or R&D?
I mean, it depends on the ranking, how they measure the innovativeness of a country. I would, without knowing the ranking, I would guess that if you look at the basic research, Austria is very strong. We have a lot of these strong research institutions, but then the actual application, I think we are probably not as good as in the other parts. And yeah, that's what we are trying to change with Austrian startups through our educational programs, through our policy work, through also creating a community where the people who do think different and want to be innovative, where they also have a home.
Yes, thank you. So I get your point on being a small country. You have to be innovative in some areas that you can boost your standards and productivity. But also Austria is perceived as one of the closest to the Western Balkans. Although startups are going into Austria, searching for partners or collaborators or investors. So this will also be perceived as an advantage for our startups. The first thing you go to your neighbors and try to seek cooperation on that level. So yeah, thank you. Back to Tanja. The corporate engagement in the region has been lacking compared to the most developed or EU countries. And it actually is one of the reasons that we also started the Western Balkans Alliance to increase this cooperation between corporates or large businesses and the startups. So how does PWC approach engagement with the startup industry in the ecosystem? Or do you have specific programs that are close to accelerators, incubators, innovation parks, and so on, or you're more directly approached to the startups themselves?
So, I mean, as I said, usually we play the dual role. We are currently, for example, helping in the design of one of the startup support program that is going to be specialized in a specific market niche as such. So in that sense, I mean, that program will support a large number of startups in that specific market niche going forward. And what we are really trying is to onboard a lot of important stakeholders to be part of that program, meaning global corporates, meaning like VCs and investors that invest in that specific market niche and can invest actually in the region of the Southeast Europe. So in that sense, I mean, that's one form of, let's say, our cooperation with startups. So indirectly through design of the startup support programs and through some of the mentorships, we actually provide the indirect support. On the other hand, we also have let's say the second aspect of our cooperation with them, which means that we help them on the individual basis to like go to certain markets or raise the investment, and then that's really tailor-made work with startups. And in some cases, through that work, we also introduce them to some of our clients, which potentially can become their clients, right? Sometimes it's for the testing purposes, sometimes it's to see how long the sales cycle, if you are B2B, how long the sales cycle for the startups might be. In some cases, we even, like work with these startups if they have certain like product or a service that for us as a network can be useful and can improve potentially our efficiency or some aspects of our businesses. So in that sense, we have this kind of different approaches of how we cooperate with startups. However, I would say that in general, like for startup corporate cooperation, the two things are key, I think, for startups to determine if they are B2B, which segment of that B2B space they're targeting. Is it a large corporate multinational? Is it someone that is in the, like small and medium space? If it is in the small and medium space, again, which exactly characteristics you need for those SMEs to have in order to be your ideal client, because all of these facts might influence the sales cycle span as such. And if it is a large corporate and if it is multinational, the startups, like need to know that, the sales cycle will be quite long, probably because of the fact that they will go through a lot of procedures, approvals, like risk assessments, IT assessments, like all these different aspects, especially if you're collecting certain type of data, and we know how data is sensitive today. So there is a certain process that, like startups will need to go through, which means a longer sales cycle, which again means influences on the business and the pace of growth in certain aspects. And I would say that in our region, like corporates, because they are not familiar with the risks associated and then how they can be mitigated in the cooperation with startups as well, sometimes they're not so reluctant to cooperate. And probably because of that, we are to some extent lacking behind. And another aspect that is quite developed now already for a couple of years in Europe and US is actually this corporate venture funds, meaning that corporates are actually creating the funds through which they invest in startups. So in our region, that's also something that is still in the, let's say, nascent phase. So there is a lot of things that need to be developed in the future and understanding of how the whole mechanism could work.
Yes, thank you. I understand that maybe from Serbia's perspective, they've been leading this path to corporate innovation and to corporate venturing, but also the region is very hungry for this kind of cooperation. So yeah, probably this will be the path. And would you say that PWC brings added value to the table by, like you said, these tailor-made services, matchmaking options, and its wider network, probably?
Yeah, I would say that, I mean, I hardly can judge, like what we are doing. So I always prefer for, like startups and others to say whether we are bringing the added value, but we definitely try our best to bring the best possible experiences and to help startups through the network with all the connections that we can provide them with, and help them actually grow in the global market with this global perspective, which I think is quite important for the region, because sometimes in the region we somehow like concentrate on the region and how we can grow from one country to another, forgetting about this global perspective.
Thank you. Thank you once again, Tanja. Markus, Austrian Startup has been ecosystem building, and your work actually is on many fronts, like you said previously, on the policy, on the research side, on the maybe tailor-made support as a business support organization, linking with the key stakeholders in Austria, I assume mostly. What are the secret ingredients of building a healthy and inclusive, well-organized startup ecosystem from your perspective?
It's a good question. I think it starts with the community and the culture you have in the community. I think you need people doing it for the right reasons, and that includes both the founders but also the ecosystem institution as around it. I don't think it's healthy if people start a startup because it makes them look cool or because it's a nice lifestyle, and at the same time it also doesn't help if institutions like corporates or similar are doing it because they want to better their image. In the end, there needs to be a serious commitment there, and there needs to be the will to change things, to have an impact. And I think if you have that common culture, then the ecosystem can flourish around it, and that is always the key to an ecosystem. It's not one organization doing that. You can provide a platform, you can provide platforms exchange, but the people need to add to that culture, to that community. And I think that is the key to any working startup ecosystem. You have to have that. And then obviously you can work on the conditions around it, because then it's about competitiveness, also international competitiveness. So for sure it helps then if you have good options to have employee stock options, and if you have a proper angel investment environment where there's money for startups to grow into, and I think that's everything around it. And if you're bad there, then your startups will struggle to compete internationally. But the first step is always have the right group of founders, the right group of ecosystem stakeholders in your community, so that it doesn't get toxic, but actually is a positive sum game.
Great answer. A lot of actually people in our ecosystem in the Western Balkans have the same problems. What comes first is the chicken, is the egg, is the regulation and support organization and the government introducing something that is in favor to both startup and investors in the ecosystem? Or is it the people and the platform, and like you said, the community builders that start first, and then you strive from there? So in your perspective, you have to have first the people, right, and then try to leverage on what you can achieve and the startup uniqueness, probably.
Exactly. That's definitely the way to go. You have to have that initial motivation, and then you can decrease the barriers. But first, you have to have the community.
You have to have the community, right? That's awesome. So back to Tanja. So what would you say as an advice to other corporates looking into partnership with startups, having in mind your approach as a PWC, as a network or a large corporate organization that has been matchmaking this, leveraging on the startup support and matchmaking with the corporates? What would you say to the corporates that want to be involved in the ecosystem? How they can leverage up the game?
Yeah, I think that what Markus just said, I think you shouldn't go into the community and into the startup ecosystem thinking that you are leveraging something, from the start. And I think that mentality in the corporate world can only lead you in the wrong direction. And I think that any corporate out there that really wants to work in the startup ecosystem needs to realize that like the actual relationship that they can build with the startups is twofold. On one hand, it's they can provide startups with the support and with the platform to potentially maybe test some product, provide some feedback, and in that way actually help startups like grow or better understand what they will be facing like with other corporates that might be their clients in the future. And that's one aspect of the whole relationship. But on the other hand, through that kind of, let's say, relationship building, which is not leveraging anything, you will be actually, like learning about some new things that are, like potentially changing the way things will be done in the future. And that's one thing. The other thing is you will be, like more acquainted with the risks of building such ventures in the future, because some corporates at some point in time might decide to create a spin-off or something similar, and then like their relationship or this kind of exchange with startups and getting to know them better really helps, because then like the decision making within the company is totally different, and it's much better understood why like one decision cannot sit on someone's table for, I don't know, 2-3 weeks or something like that. And I would say that it is also important for corporates to actually understand that through this kind of relationship with startups, they are actually having an advantage over others, I would say, especially in this region where we already said there is not a lot of corporates that that work with startups, that build these kind of relationships, etc. So in that sense, working with startups will bring you a lot of insights, a lot of different perspectives, a lot of like I would say even different culture and energy that you will be being able to recognize and get to know. And then I think the most important influence that can happen through this kind of building relationship for corporates is that actually it can boost innovation within your teams, and it can change and influence your culture. And I think for that to happen, you really have to go into this kind of relationship building instead of leveraging something. Of course, now, I mean, I would be an utopian probably to think that, like corporates will always do everything just out of a goodwill, and we are all kind of great and investing in the ecosystems, etc. Of course, some corporates, in order to like invest a lot of time, invest in a lot of energy, and be really in the market, through time, they will have to leverage certain aspects of that relationship. That might be, that through the product of a startup, they will cut the time of certain, like processes, start using some different aspects, or improve something within their businesses. It might be that they will invest in that startup and then expect some, like return down the line, or something like that. Or it can be something totally different. But I think that, like building the relationship, you have to start it without having this end goal as a first thing why you are doing something with startups.
Great. Actually, that at the end of the day, it should be a win-win relationship between the startup and corporates. Each should take its pros as a gain from this process. But like you said, it's maybe relationship, and you have to build on something. Markus, in the Western Balkans, we have a lot of let's say issues about fundraising and getting investors on board, and investor readiness program. So how is it in Austria, and is it how are you accessing actually potential investments, some KPIs, or how you are doing your measurements if the startups are ready to getting to be invested in?
Well, I mean, generally, I think all around the world, we currently are experiencing some kind of liquidity crunch. So if you would have asked me 2 years ago, I would have said early stage money is it's everywhere at the moment for Austrian startups, and then we always had the problem with later stage money. So there we don't have a big like a growth stage financial provider for startups here in Austria. So that then they always have to go international, which is fine for the startups. I think anyway, once you're on that scale, it's normal to become global because Austria is so small. From I would say a national perspective, sometimes startups move out of Austria at that stage, and that's obviously not something that we desire. So here, I think is generally something where we could still improve. And to be honest, at the moment, yes, we also probably need some more incentives for startups or for startup investing in the early stages, because at the moment it's drying up. So this is definitely something where there's also room for policy innovation. On the other hand, yes, it's also about investment readiness. Personally, I really believe there's for sure all the basics that startups need to bring with them. But then there's two questions I always really like to look at. And that is, why is that the right team to solve that challenge? Because it's very likely that out there somewhere else in the world, there's 3 other teams doing exactly the same. So why is this team the one that globally will win this market? And the other one is, why is now the right timing for it? Because you can be early, you can be late. Often there's some kind of changes happening in our world, may it be trends, may it be regulatory changes. If you find the right timing for these things, then usually growing your startup becomes much easier, because then you're riding a wave to a certain extent, and that can also be dangerous sometimes if the wave then comes down and you fall into a hole. Look at all the startups that build stuff for remote Corona settings and are now struggling. But generally, having that at the beginning to accelerate the speed you're growing with is very helpful for a startup. So those two questions are usually something I like to look at when thinking about investing in a startup.
Yeah, you actually mentioned one good point that I want to emphasize is a lot of startups actually struggle with the first early stage investment, one of the first, and usually it's the most difficult one. But also here in the Balkans, you cannot see a lot of growth funds or growth capital for you to scale up. So usually, yeah, startups and founders go uproad and search for this kind of opportunities. But you mentioned one thing that is interesting. The seed or pre-seed capital is drying. What's the cause of it, in your perspective?
I think that's a general global macro problem, because interest rates have risen so much that you on the one hand have different opportunity costs. So if you get on your normal bank account, you already get 3-4%. Then there's much less willingness to go down the waterfall and go into these really risky assets like startups are. So that was the time of the zero interest rate policy was a very attractive environment for startups, because to get some kind of percentage, to get some kind of return, investors had to go deep into risk. And that usually is something that helps startups. And on the other hand, what also happened through this different macroeconomic environment is that the valuations of tech companies, also public tech companies, have sharply declined. And this is always what you look at if you think about investing in a startup. You have something in mind, how you can make an exit. And if that exit, and you have similar companies being worth 100 billion, then it's an attractive investment. But if suddenly these 100 billion companies are only worth 10 billion anymore, which is still a lot, but much different, that also changes the multiple for the early stage investment. So this also makes an environment where there's a big difference between what startups expect and have been, I think, used to over the last few years, and what investors can actually offer based on the math they are doing. So this creates a crunch, I would say, at the moment.
Great view. So we shouldn't be just tracking the team's vision, mission, and KPIs, the momentum, why, and what's unique, but also the macro picture of the alternative and opportunities.
Yeah, you have to. I think that's for sure. It's good to focus on what you can change, but at the same time, you have to be mindful of the current situation and what it means also for the fundraising environment.
Great point. Thank you. So Tanja, back to you. You meet a lot of founders and in your daily activities, and some of them are maybe listening today. So one of the most pressing questions that we receive nowadays as support organizations working on the ground from founders is, do they really understand what they're looking at when talking to corporates? How you can navigate through? We've mentioned previously how corporates see the startup and the innovation ecosystem, but bottom-up approach, okay, are the startups ready to work with corporates on their level? And what should be changed if not?
I think that some startups are obviously, because from the beginning they've done a couple of steps, and they prepare themselves for especially like those that are targeting B2B segment. They properly did certain steps, and then they're ready to talk to us, and we have these situations where we are approached by startups, we start talking to them, and we really realize that they know how it will look like, and how this cooperation with us or some other big corporates might look like, and that means they did their homework properly. So I would say that from the founder's perspective, what we see that often is something that is a problem for founders in our region is, and not just our region, I've seen that in the UK to be fair, is that sometimes you to some extent disregard how important it is to do your research before you actually go and talk to corporate. Because if you do not do the research properly, and if you do not understand which exactly B2B segment niche and which specific companies you are targeting and for which reason and whom you are targeting in that company, usually it will take you a lot longer. Even when you meet someone at the conference, you might pitch to the wrong person, right? Maybe that person that you met at a conference is not the persona to which you need to be selling, because maybe there are 5 more people above that person, and then you will end up with 3 months delayed answer to your potential sales pitch or something like that. So in that sense, I think just be sure that once you go and really dedicate time to determining, when you say B2B market, what that really means to you, and is it, usually it's not the whole business community in that sense. Usually you have different segments, and maybe you will be targeting a couple of groups, but then the approach will also be totally different from one to the other, etc. So that aspect is really, really important. And then I would say, don't be afraid to even, send a LinkedIn message to some of the corporates that are heading the departments that are really key for your product, your future product development, or they might be, someone to whom you can pitch tomorrow and sell your product. Don't be afraid to send the LinkedIn message even before you enter any kind of cooperation with a corporate, because sitting at a coffee and talking about your product in an informal way might give you a lot of insights of how certain aspects can function and what can and cannot be done in the corporate system. Because we sometimes get to the point where we realize that a product of a certain startup cannot be plugged into majority of the systems of the targeted group from their initial research, right? So that means you have to adjust the product, invest additional time. And if you have these conversations early on, it's much easier. So you don't waste time and you don't have the missed opportunities in that way. So like, I cannot stress enough how it is important to have this research done in advance, and then, like, try and talk to corporates. Really, we are, like, majority of us at least is super friendly, and we want to share the experience. And like, even if you don't know someone, probably someone from the network knows. So use that frequently. I don't think that we are using that enough in the region.
So if you're a startup listening to this, do your homework, do your research. That's essential for you to be able to effectively communicate with the large corporates. Markus, back to you. What are the most exciting trends that you see happening in Austria, or maybe in some EU countries, emerging from local ecosystem, and how is your organization, like Austrian Startups, trying to take advantage of this? Either in favor of what you're building, or you have to shift and navigate?
No, I think generally people are in favor. It's more the question how. No, I think coming back to the initial question, I think what's on everybody's mind is obviously AI, and we have that in Austria too. We have one company called Magic that is building a co-pilot for developers. So the idea is that you automate most of the software development process, which for sure is also interesting from a perspective of entrepreneurship, because it gives much more people access to being able to build something that you dream of. I think, like in many other countries, we have a bottleneck when it comes to developing resources in Austria, and having the possibility to do more stuff yourself, to be less dependent on getting a lot of really good developers, I think is a good opportunity also when it comes to entrepreneurship. And the other one I think that we see currently very strongly in Austria is digital health, or generally health tech, where through Corona I felt we got a lot more focus on innovation in this space. And we have a strong background in Austria, strong biotech scene also, and health tech scene. So that is something where quite a lot of companies are coming up now with new kinds of solution to tackle all kinds of illnesses, but also rethink the whole health user journey, I would say, and make this more individual and so more personalized, but also more comfortable.
So you mentioned the digital or health tech. You mentioned artificial intelligence as a hot topic. Do you see after the pandemic some industries that are declining? Actually, there's not a buzz anymore. Investors don't like to be, let's say, linked with them.
There's a certain reversion to the mean. I think you see that when it comes to grocery delivery, you see that when it comes to digital education. So these players, I think if you compare them with where they were in 2020, they still grew a lot. It's just if you compare them to 2 years ago, then it gets certainly they are having challenges. So some of those have to let some people go, some have to downsize in general, recalibrate their plans, focus more on profitability. So paired with the general fundraising environment, which is a different one than 2 years ago, I think you see this reversion to the mean for quite a lot of companies in these spaces. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Before actually wrapping this up, I would like to ask you both one question that comes from the participants. So from your experience, it said, what type of advice would you give to ecosystem builder organization assessing a new, less developed ecosystems in their stage in order to increase the awareness of what among its members? So Markus, you can start if you're ready.
I mean, I think what you need to create is access points. So create events, probably ideally create content formats that let people get inspired by fellow entrepreneurs so that you can grow the community, because this community will then also be your leverage point for legislatory change. So if you want to achieve something on a political level, you need to have a strong community, you need to have a base so that politicians actually see it and that you get their attention. And then you have to understand that on a political level, there's also different levels. So you have to get the decision maker on board. That's more through the why and the grander vision. But then you also have to get the level of actually putting it into place on board. Because, you know, from a politician saying this needs to be done to a law being put in place, there's a lot of room. So this is, then there's the sections in the ministries writing the laws, and then there is all kinds of special interest groups giving their perspectives and usually being against it because they're against change. So dealing with all of that is then a process. But again, also here, I believe it starts with community and creating engaging content, creating engaging events that allow you to reach new people.
Thank you. Tanja, your thoughts of it?
Yes, I could not agree more, like with Markus on what he said about, you know, like that it's key really to build this, you know, like awareness, enthusiasm, positive example shift, you know, like cultural shift as a first step, and creating this community that is really, you know, like connected and talking, you know, like to each other, and because that also creates, you know, like a certain kind of pressure later on that certain changes are needed, right? But I think that parallelly with that, what you can also do in these early stages of the ecosystem development is to have, you know, like whether it is one organization, a group of organizations, or somehow some kind of a community that will actually put forward to the government, you know, that some other countries are a couple of steps ahead, that you could be there, you know, that what other countries have done, why that is important, because that can also create additional, you know, like sense of urgency on the government side for them to want to change certain things. Especially, you know, like in some cases, it really, you know, like gives a positive, I would say, inclination if you give them, you know, like example of the countries who in the short period of time have, you know, like made a couple of steps ahead, and now you are lagging behind, and that shouldn't be the case. So this kind of, you know, like a gameplay with the community and actually putting forward additional pressure from the government side can be really important.
Yes, I can also agree on both of you. Having in mind that the Western Balkan region, this is it's in this early stage of development. It's still fragmented with not a lot of experience. I would like to hear your both opinion of what should be tackled first, or what should be changed first in order to catch up with the rest of Europe, or what we have to have immediate impact on in order to move things forward more speedily, like you said, Tanja.
Well, I think it's a really tough question because, you know, the ecosystems in the region are in different phases. Even though everyone is in early stages, then, you know, like when you look deeper, you see that there are certain levels there. So for some ecosystems, certain things might be more important than for others. But if I would have to say one thing overall for the region, that I would now, you know, like work on is definitely, you know, global connectedness. And I think that's the aspect where I would work the most. In terms, and when I say global connectedness, I think, you know, it's really putting the region on the map for the investments. It's also putting, like our startups on a global map of significant players in certain market niches, and also connecting our, like startup support organizations with those abroad. This doesn't mean that we already don't have some of these things. I just think that we need to put that on a higher level as a next step.
Thank you. Markus? It's a tough question, I know.
Yes, it's a tough question. I think it always starts with talent and money. So I think the first thing is always to get smart people to believe in themselves and start companies. I think if you get that mindset into people's heads, that's a game changer. And then it's not about catching up to the head. I think that the people who have the most creative, brightest brains who work on the future, those will be the countries who will thrive in the future. And there's no reason why you can't be better than the rest of Europe there. It's a cultural mindset question. And I think usually if you get that right, then as a second step, money will flow into the country and will also be mobilized from within the country. Because, yeah, that's a natural process that the brightest brains will also attract money. And I think it's as simple as that.
I get your point. And I think personally, I agree with you that money will follow, but not solve or cause any of the development. So if you had this right, if you have your uniqueness as a national, regional ecosystem, then if you get your mechanism and dynamics right, money and investor will follow on.
And for that, role models are really essential so that people actually see it's possible. If I have a great idea, if I want to tackle the big problems of our times, I can do it. If you have that realization, that's really powerful.
Yes, thank you. So wrapping this session up, do you have anything particular to emphasize before we close today's sessions? Did we miss something that you want to share with the audience in particular? Tanja, maybe you? No, Markus?
I think we covered everything.
Yeah, I think we covered most of the questions that I wanted to ask you, and I from the audience perspective, I think the audience was also kind of hyped about what your answers will be. And if nothing more, I want to thank you both for having time and efforts for this webinar. Very useful talks with both of you. Wish you many success in the future, Markus and Tanja, in both personal and your organization's way. And stay tuned for the next session of our Ecosystem Café. And cheers up until then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so Gogo switched off and the live stream is finished. So guys, thank you. I don't know why he was the first one to leave. I'm not sure.
All good.
He was like, I have to run.
No, there is. Gogo, hi. Gogo, we were guessing what was the reason that you left so quickly. You are mute.
You're mute, yeah.
Sorry, technical issues as always. I suppose it was good for you, Tanja and Markus, as it was for me.
Yes, and from both of you guys, we within the alliance, Markus. I mean, we're doing very similar things, of course, at a different scale because we've just started, and we're focusing on engaging corporates like PWC into more long-term projects. We see that that's a need. I'm not sure if Gogo will be, but I will be in Maribor at Podium very 15th, and we'll be at a number of events. I think the next web is the next one. Gogo will plan to go there.
Yeah, also should attend Podium. So yeah,
we don't know of an Austrian-based, or maybe we haven't selected one. That's an event that you hold as a perhaps as Austrian startups that we can pin for next year or maybe this year.
I mean, if you're spontaneous, in 2 weeks, there's our big yearly event, the Austrian Startup Summit, on the 3rd of May. If you want to join there, let me know. Then I'm happy to. I think now you still get the ticket on the like the general sale. It's for free anyway, but
Okay.
we might be sold out soon, and then you will have to write me if you still want to get the ticket.
Okay. Well, we'll. I mean, if I'll have to have a look, but if not, we will, because there's over 12 hubs within our network, and then we might send someone, let's say, on our behalf, and then just to get to know how you do it and what you do. But of course, in the future, we'll let you know how we engage and where. I mean, we've planned a number of events this year, so we will try and keep an eye if you're going to be there or not.
Perfect.
Yeah, but thank you for today. I know I pestered you a lot with emails, so sorry, and look forward to seeing you again.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, hopefully see you soon.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
Bye bye, Tanya. Also.
Bye. Nice
Thanks,
to meet you,
everybody.
Markus. Bye.
Very nice indeed.